Officer Sawyer Clark never expected a simple patrol through the snowy streets of Frost Hollow to change his life. But that's exactly what happened. When he saw a starving German shepherd being chased away by shop owners, he offered her his lunch, thinking that would be the end of it. But the moment she took the food and ran into the blizzard, he knew something was different. He followed her through the snow, and what he found under that frozen bridge would break his heart in half. 3 newborn puppies, a mother too weak to eat, yet strong enough to give everything for her babies. And that was only the beginning. What happened next will make you cry, and believe in second chances again. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind in Frost Hollow wasn't just cold, it was a presence. It howled between the rooftops and slid like knives through the cracks of old buildings. Snow drifted down in silent sheets, covering the sidewalks, muffling tires, dimming the world. It was just past 4 in the afternoon, but the sun was already bleeding out behind the hills. Streetlights blinked to life one by one, their glow weak against the white sky. Officer Sawyer Clark stepped out of his patrol car and drew his scarf tighter around his neck. The heat inside the cruiser had lulled him into comfort, but the moment his boots touched the frozen pavement, the bite of winter snapped him back to full alertness. He was 39, lean but strong, his frame a quiet echo of the soldier he once was. His eyes, storm gray, thoughtful, often unreadable, scanned his surroundings with the instinct of someone who'd seen too much to ever relax fully. He wore his police badge not with pride but with responsibility. Since returning from deployment, Frost Hollow was the only place that felt honest, weather-beaten, worn down, but still standing. He preferred the quiet, and winter brought plenty of that, but not today. Shouting cut through the wind. Not panicked, just sharp, mean. "Get out of here!" "Filthy thing, go!" Sawyer turned toward the noise. Across the street, in front of Hayden's grocery, a group of locals had formed a loose circle, arms waving, boots stomping, trying to drive something away. At the center of their jeers was a German shepherd, female, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Her fur, once likely a proud mix of sable and black, was now matted and dulled by dirt and frost. Her body was thin, dangerously thin, ribs and hip bones visible through the shaggy coat. She stood silent in the snow, unmoving, her ears lowered, her tail tucked, yet she didn't run. Sawyer frowned. The woman, waving a broom, Mrs. Green, mid-50s, curly silver hair tucked under a knit hat, huffed. "That mutt's been sniffing around all week. Won't leave us alone." Behind her, Mr. Hayden, the store's owner, emerged holding a snow shovel like a weapon. He was a wiry man in his 60s with a stiff jaw and red-rimmed eyes. Always looked like winter offended him personally. "She's a stray. Who knows what she's carrying? Get lost," he barked, raising the shovel. "That's enough," Sawyer said firmly as he approached. Mr. Hayden paused but didn't lower the shovel. "She's scaring my customers." "She's not doing anything," Sawyer replied, "just standing there." "She's dirty." Dangerous. Sawyer looked at the dog. She didn't bark, didn't growl. She only stared at the ground, snow clinging to her whiskers, her breath coming in shallow puffs. She wasn't begging. She was surviving. Sawyer took a slow step forward and crouched down. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his lunch-a-ham sandwich, still warm in foil, and a half-wrapped sausage link. He unwrapped the sandwich halfway and extended it in one gloved hand. "Hey, girl," he murmured. "You hungry?" The shepherd lifted her head slightly, ears twitching. She stepped forward, hesitated, then moved closer. She took the sandwich without touching his hand with the gentleness of a dog who had once been trained not to bite, no matter how hungry. Then, without warning, she turned and ran. Not bolting in fear, not zigzagging like a cornered animal. She moved with purpose. She didn't look back. Sawyer blinked. The sandwich still dangled from her mouth. She could have devoured it there, at his feet, but she hadn't come for herself. She was taking it to someone, to something. He straightened up, eyes narrowing. Wait. Her paw prints were already disappearing in the snow, swallowed by the wind. Sawyer adjusted his scarf, turned to the small crowd still watching, and waved them off. "Get back inside." "She's not your problem." He crossed the street, stepped over the sidewalk curb, and followed her into the alley behind the grocery store. He didn't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way she hadn't made a sound. Maybe it was the way she took the food and ran like time was running out. Whatever it was, something deep inside told him this wasn't over. He passed dumpsters, fences, and the back of an old hardware store. Her trail led across a patch of open snow toward the abandoned rail bridge at the edge of town. The wind howled louder out here. Her tracks were still fresh, tight steps, close together, not panicked, focused, leading somewhere. Sawyer picked up his pace. She wasn't just running, she was leading. The wind howled louder as Officer Sawyer Clark followed the dog's trail out of town. Her paw prints zigzagged through alleys and across frozen patches of snow, then curved sharply downhill toward the edge of Frost Hollow. Here, the town gave way to overgrown lots and abandoned structures, places the snow buried more deeply, and where only the wind dared linger. The trail led to an old railway bridge, its wooden beams half-rotten and its steel bolts rusted brown with time. Below it, the world was quieter. The snowfall muffled all sound but the soft crunch of Sawyer's boots. He moved cautiously beneath the bridge's arch, ducking beneath a beam as snow sifted down from above. Faint noises, too soft to be wind, caught his ear. Then he saw her. The German shepherd was lying low in a corner of the bridge's underbelly, between stacked crates and a collapsed sheet of corrugated tin. Her back was curled, her head lowered, tail tucked protectively. And beneath her, 3 tiny shapes moved faintly. Puppies, barely born. Their fur was thin and patchy, and their eyes still sealed shut. They were nestled in a crude bedding made of rags, newspaper, and brittle straw. The area smelled faintly of wet cardboard, sour milk, and something else, something desperate. The mother lifted her head as he approached. Her eyes locked onto his, wide but not panicked. She didn't bark, didn't move. She only watched. Sawyer slowed his steps, crouched beside a crumbling concrete pillar, and spoke gently. "So, that's where you were going." She said nothing, of course, but her posture told the story. The sandwich from earlier lay half-eaten beside her. She had saved it until she returned, then eaten only enough to keep going. Now she was lying down again, positioning herself so that the 3 pups could nurse from her. One of them, a smaller pup with a gray stripe down its back, wasn't latching on like the others. It squirmed feebly, then went still, breathing fast and shallow. Sawyer's heart squeezed. She wasn't scavenging for herself. She was keeping these puppies alive with what little she had left, and by the look of things, she was losing that fight. He stepped forward again, holding out both hands in plain sight. "I'm not going to hurt them." "Or you." She didn't flinch. That surprised him more than anything. He sat in the snow beside them, his coat crunching under him. The mother turned back to her pups, licking the weakest one gently with her cracked tongue. Sawyer studied her in detail now. Her coat, despite the grime, had once been a rich sable and black blend classic German shepherd markings. Her ears were upright but chipped at the edges. Her tail twitched with fatigue. She was likely 5 or 6 years old, but her eyes looked much older. Like they belonged to someone who had seen war. He glanced around. The den was barely insulated. The wind pierced through broken slats in the bridge, and the snow piled around them like a rising tide. The rags were damp. The pups had no chance of surviving the night here, not with temperatures dropping and one already struggling to breathe. He unzipped his jacket slowly and pulled out a spare emergency blanket, folding it across his knees. Then he took off his gloves, held them against his chest to warm them, and said softly, "We're getting you out of here." The shepherd looked up. She didn't growl. She didn't move. She only blinked. Sawyer gently reached toward the smallest pup first. It was barely warm to the touch, its legs twitching weakly. He cupped it in both hands, wrapping it in a scarf from his pocket. One of the other pups whimpered, but the mother remained still watching. Next, he reached for the other two. One at a time, carefully, he placed them in the lined interior of his coat, zipping it halfway to keep them close to his body. Finally, he turned back to the mother. "I need you to trust me now, just a little longer." He rose, stepping backward toward his cruiser, parked several blocks away. The shepherd stood slowly. She didn't whimper or limp, but her movements were stiff. The snow clung to her legs. She looked once at the pups bundled in his coat, then followed. No leash, no commands. She simply followed. 15 minutes later, the cruiser's headlights glowed faintly through the snow as Sawyer opened the back door and placed the pups gently into a padded crate he'd kept in the trunk for strays. The heater inside blasted warm air, and the smallest pup stirred just slightly. He opened the passenger side door. The mother dog stood for a moment, staring at the seat, then hopped in, curling into a tight circle. She let out a breath so deep it fogged the glass. Sawyer climbed behind the wheel, put the car in drive, and tapped the dashboard. "Hold on, Mama," he murmured. "We're not done yet." And with that, the cruiser rolled forward, cutting through snowdrifts toward Frost Hollow's only veterinary clinic. The wheels of the patrol cruiser hissed against the snowy road as Officer Sawyer Clark turned onto Elm Street, where the glowing green cross of Monroe Veterinary Clinic blinked dimly against the snowfall. The clinic was nestled in the corner of a quiet intersection, its windows fogged from within and a soft halo of light spilling out onto the frozen pavement. It was nearly 6:30 p.m., and most of Frost Hollow had already shut down for the storm. But Lila never closed, not really. Dr. Lila Monroe was in her late 50s, tall and thin, with high cheekbones and a posture that looked like it had once been regal, now bent slightly forward as if she carried something invisible on her back. Her dark auburn hair, streaked with silver, was pulled into a low bun, and her eyes, gray like smoke, seemed to always be watching with more weight than she let on. She lived alone above the clinic, never remarried after losing her son, Tyler, a K-9 handler who died on duty 5 years ago. Since then, Lila had devoted herself to the animals that came through her door, particularly retired or injured service dogs. When Sawyer pulled up, the lights inside were still on. He parked under the eave and gently stepped out of the car, clutching the bundled blanket where the 3 puppies slept against his chest. The German shepherd sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching him. Her breathing had steadied, but her eyes were sharp, alert. Sawyer opened the door. "Come on, girl. We've got someone who can help." She didn't hesitate. She stepped down onto the snowy ground, sniffed the air once, then followed him to the clinic's glass door. Inside, the smell of antiseptic and lavender met them. The warmth hit immediately, and the puppies stirred slightly in the folds of the wool. Lila was already walking toward them from the back hallway, pulling on a gray fleece over her scrubs. "Didn't expect to see you tonight, Sawyer," she said, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "You look like hell." He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Found them under the old rail bridge." 3 pups. One struggling. Mom hasn't eaten properly in days. Lila's eyes dropped to the bundle, then rose to the dog standing quietly beside him. She blinked once, a flicker of recognition in her face. Without another word, she unlocked the side door and waved them in. "Exam room 2. "Let's move." The shepherd padded behind them in silence, her ears twitching at each sound but her steps steady. In the exam room, the lights were brighter, the steel table cool and spotless. Lila flicked on the heater in the corner, setting it to high, then retrieved clean towels and a heated blanket from a storage cabinet. Sawyer gently placed the puppies on the towel. Lila worked fast hands sure, breath even. She examined each one with the practiced calm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, yet still cared each time like it was the first. "This one's hypothermic," she said, nodding toward the smallest pup. "Barely has enough blood sugar to keep his heart going." She wrapped the pup in a warming pouch and inserted a tiny needle into its thigh. Glucose solution dripped in slow, controlled pace. She didn't look up as she added, "You did the right thing bringing them in." Sawyer leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "She followed me without a leash," he said. "Didn't growl. Didn't bark. Just walked right into the car. Lila turned her head slightly, studying the mother. She's calm, focused, like she's been trained to follow orders, but also, she paused. She's holding herself like she's waiting for something to go wrong. Sawyer nodded. She reminds me of someone who's seen war. Lila approached the dog now, slowly. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said, crouching. "Can I see your ears?" The shepherd didn't move. She allowed Lila to brush the fur gently aside, checking for tattoos, tags, anything. "There's a scar behind the right ear," Lila murmured. "Looks surgical. Could be from a chip implant." She grabbed the scanner from the shelf, waved it slowly near the dog's neck. A beep, green light. Lila looked at the screen. No name registered, but the chip code starts with K9E. She frowned. That's a federal designation. She was a working dog. Sawyer didn't speak for a moment. The room seemed to settle, the heat washing over them in a heavy silence. Echo, that's what I'll call her, he thought suddenly, a name that sounded like strength remembered. He looked at the dog again, this time not as a stray, but as something discarded by the system she once served. She was left out there, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Lila straightened and walked over to her small desk. She typed quickly into the registry system, trying to cross-reference the code, but nothing came up. The file was locked, restricted, possibly military. "We might not get much more from this," she said, "unless we pull someone who knows the back end." Sawyer exhaled slowly. Lila gave him a look, half stern, half soft. "You can leave them here tonight? I'll monitor the pup's vitals. The others are stable, but they'll need formula. She probably doesn't have much milk left." "I'll stay," he said without hesitation. "I'm off duty anyway." She nodded once. "Then grab that stool. It's going to be a long night." He sat down in the corner, watching as Lila gently moved the mother to a quiet crate lined with heating pads. Echo now, officially her name in his mind, didn't resist. She curled around her puppies again, sighing softly, her body finally allowed to rest. Lila dimmed the lights. For a while, the room was quiet, just the sound of breathing and the rhythmic beep of a monitor. Sawyer leaned back, letting his head rest against the wall. His bones were tired, but his chest was warm. He didn't know why, exactly. He only knew one thing. This wasn't over. The clinic was quiet except for the ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional soft whimper of a nursing pup. Outside, the snow had turned to sleet, painting the streets of Frost Hollow in shimmering ice. Officer Sawyer Clark sat hunched over the corner workstation, the glow of the screen reflecting in his storm-gray eyes. On the floor nearby, Echo lay curled around her 3 pups. Her breathing had steadied, her ribs still visible but her body no longer shaking. The mother in her was relentless. She had eaten only enough to stay upright, letting the rest of her energy go to milk. The pups were feeding now, blind, pink-bellied, fragile. Sawyer exhaled and clicked the final tab in the encrypted database. He had bypassed 2 layers of credentials to get here. The internal decommissioned K9 incident reports. Unit tag E014. Name Echo. Breed German Shepherd. Age at discharge 4 years service division, Western Metro. K9 Task Force. Handler name redacted. Reason for discharge. Failure to comply during active pursuit. Aggression redirected. Deemed liability. Note: future use not advised. Dangerous. Sawyer frowned. Aggression redirected? Lila Monroe appeared beside him, holding a mug of peppermint tea. Her red hair was loosely tied back, the curls frizzed from long hours. She wore a deep green thermal top under her lab coat, sleeves pushed up. She looked down at the screen, her lips pressed in a thin line. That sounds like bureaucratic code for something messy. Sawyer clicked open the incident log. There was only one entry, vague, barely a paragraph. During narcotics pursuit, Subject Echo failed to follow bite command. Instead, she positioned herself defensively in front of civilian minor. Officer issued repeat command. Echo remained non-compliant. Officer injured during apprehension. Dog removed from service. "That's it?" Sawyer said. "No medical report, no follow-up?" Lila sat down beside him. "A bite command refused? To protect a child?" Sawyer's voice was low. "That's not dangerous. That's judgment." He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. "They punished her for saving a kid." Lila nodded slowly, looking at Echo. She was trained to take down suspects, but she made a choice. And they called it defiance. "She was just doing the right thing," Sawyer murmured, then added, "Same thing most departments don't know how to process anymore." The wind slammed against the windows, making both of them flinch. Lila stood up and crossed the room to Echo's crate. The mother dog lifted her head but didn't growl, only blinked, her deep amber eyes tired but alert. Lila crouched and gently stroked her ears. "You remember it all, don't you?" Echo didn't move, but her breathing slowed. The smallest pup stirred and let out a whimper, barely louder than a sigh. Lila stood and turned back. "I think I have a contact in the old Metro task force. If they still have body cam footage of that day, maybe we'll find the truth." Sawyer nodded. "Do it." He returned to the screen. "And I'll put in a request for the civilian report. If there really was a kid, someone must have followed up." They worked side by side in silence after that, the kind of silence that shared purpose rather than absence. Each keystroke, each search query was a step into the shadowy corners of a system that had failed a loyal dog. Sawyer paused once more before logging off, eyes still on Echo. "Whatever happened," he said quietly, "you didn't deserve to be thrown away." The frost had lifted, but the cold still clung to the bones of Frost Hollow. Snow gave way to patches of ice and earth as the town exhaled the quiet breath of midwinter thaw. Inside the clinic, the wood-burning stove crackled in its corner, radiating a gentle orange glow across the tiled floor. The smell of pine smoke mingled with the faint scent of antiseptic. Officer Sawyer Clark sat at the corner table with a flash drive in hand, staring at the envelope it had arrived in. The handwriting was tight, slanted, and vaguely familiar. He'd received the package that morning, slid beneath the door of the police outpost. No return address, just a note. "You deserve the truth, MC." He plugged it into Lila's old laptop. The screen flickered once, then loaded a grainy video. The timestamp read September 14th, 2 years ago. The footage came from a body cam. The view bounced with each breath of the officer. Voices shouted. A child screamed. Flashlights scanned a dark warehouse, rusted shelves and crates looming like shadows. Then came a growl. Echo burst into view, sleek and agile, coat shining under the light. She sprinted ahead, barking sharply. One officer yelled, "Bite!" The command was clear, but Echo ignored it. Instead, she veered left, leapt onto a crate, and landed in front of a young girl, bound and trembling behind a stack of wooden pallets. Then chaos. Another figure appeared, a man in plain clothes, shouting. Echo spun toward him, ears up, tail stiff, uncertain. He lunged, trying to grab the girl. Echo lunged faster. The bite was fast, defensive, not fatal, but bloody. The man screamed. Officers rushed in. The girl was carried out. The man clutched his arm and shouted words lost in static. Moments later, someone barked, "Shut that camera off!" and the video ended. Sawyer sat frozen. The man Echo bit. He recognized him now. He was Wesley Mardane, cousin to the deputy commissioner at the time. He wasn't registered on that mission. He wasn't supposed to be there. "Echo didn't fail," Sawyer whispered. "She did what no one else could." Lila Monroe walked in, drying her hands on a towel. She paused when she saw the look in his eyes. "You found something." He turned the laptop toward her. They watched in silence. When it ended, Lila's breath hitched. They buried it. Sawyer's jaw tensed. They blamed her to protect someone connected to power. Lila clenched the towel. And discharged her, tossed her away. Outside the exam room, a soft bark broke the tension. Echo was up, standing alert at the gate, watching them. She'd felt the shift in energy, like she knew her name had been spoken in truth. Sawyer stood slowly. She saved that girl. Lila nodded, and paid the price. That night, Sawyer wrote a statement, attached the video, marked it with his badge number. He posted it to the Frost Hollow Precinct Board, then sent it to the Regional K-9 Command. But it didn't stop there. With Lila's help, he uploaded the clip to the town's local community page. No commentary, just facts. Let the truth speak, and it did. Within hours, the post spread like fire across the snowy town. Comments flooded in. Words like hero, injustice, and bring her back. A local reporter called before dawn. By sunrise, someone had already painted a mural of Echo on a concrete wall behind the library. Her eyes fierce, standing guard beside the words, "Loyalty never lies." Sawyer walked down Main Street later that day, coffee in hand. For the first time since he moved back to Frost Hollow, people nodded, smiled. A few even clapped his shoulder. Echo had become more than a dog. She had become a symbol. Back at the clinic, the pups were growing fast. The largest one, a male with a white stripe on his nose, had started walking in wide, clumsy steps. The runt, the one with the crooked tail, still needed warmth, often sleeping pressed beneath Echo's neck. One morning, Sawyer found Echo in the back room, standing over her pups. She gave a low whistle, sharp, short. The largest pup raised his head. She did it again. This time, the pup stumbled toward her. Sawyer crouched nearby. "She's training them," he said in awe. Echo turned her gaze toward him, tail flicking once. "She's not just a mother," Lila said softly behind him. "She's still a K-9. Sawyer looked down at the pups, half playful, half curious. Maybe she's making sure they know who they are. Where they come from. That night, while the wind howled over rooftops and the town slept beneath frost, Echo stood watch by the door. The stove glowed quietly behind her. Her eyes didn't close, not fully, not yet. The snow outside had softened to a gentle hush, blanketing the sidewalks of Frost Hollow in powdery white. Inside the small veterinary clinic, warmth flickered from an old gas stove in the corner. The scent of chamomile tea drifted faintly, mingling with the comforting smell of fresh hay and antiseptic. Echo lay curled beside her pups, now chubby and curious, their eyes open and ears twitching at every sound. The bell above the door tinkled softly. Lila looked up from her clipboard and offered a warm smile. "Evelyn!" What a surprise Evelyn Hart stepped in, her boots dusted with snow. She was in her late 60s, a slender woman with silver curls tucked beneath a burgundy knit cap. Her eyes, kind and observant, swept the room before resting on the mother dog and her pups. "I read about her in the paper," Evelyn said, setting down her mittens. The K-9 turned hero again. She approached the pen slowly, kneeling without hesitation. Echo lifted her head, watching cautiously. Her eyes, still sharp, tracked Evelyn's movement, but her tail gave a faint thump of recognition. Lila chuckled. "She's picky." "You've passed her test. I've worked with enough souls who've forgotten how to trust," Evelyn said gently. "Some wounds don't bleed, but they still ache." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a hardcover book titled Where the Wild Things Are. "I have an idea," she said, turning to Lila. "It's unconventional." By the following week, the clinic's side room had been transformed. A shelf of picture books now stood beside a row of floor cushions and beanbags. The sign on the door read, "Pause and Pages. Quiet reading with quiet friends." Children with anxiety, selective mutism, and mild autism began trickling in, some holding the hands of weary but hopeful parents. They were drawn not only by the stories, but by the gentle presence of Echo and her pups, now named Scout, Maple, and Dusty. Scout, easily the most curious of the three, had a shiny black coat, one floppy ear, and a habit of tilting his head whenever someone spoke. He was always the first to approach a child, especially when they seemed unsure. One morning, a woman arrived with her son, Leo. He was about 8, with sandy brown hair, a downturned mouth, and a stiff grip on a stuffed rabbit missing an eye. His mother signed the waiver silently, mouthing, "He doesn't speak." Not since last year, Leo sat cross-legged near the far corner, his shoulders tense. Scout padded over and plopped down beside him, tail sweeping gently. Leo didn't look up, but he didn't move away either. Day after day, Leo returned. He never spoke. He barely touched the books. But he always chose the same spot, and Scout always found his way to Leo's side. Sometimes the pup rested his chin on the boy's knee. Sometimes he merely breathed beside him, syncing his rhythm to the child's quiet world. Evelyn observed from afar, never rushing. "Connection is never forced," she whispered to Lila one afternoon. "It's earned." Like trust. Like love. Then, on the 12th visit, it happened. Leo was holding a book with trembling fingers, eyes darting across the page. Scout, as usual, sat beside him. The room was quiet, the fire humming in the background. Suddenly, Leo whispered, "Wild." His voice cracked. Scout's ears perked. Leo turned slightly toward the dog, lowering his face so close it almost touched Scout's. "Wild things," he murmured. Tears welled up in his mother's eyes. Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest. Lila stood frozen in the doorway. And Scout? He simply wagged his tail and leaned in closer. Echo watched from her mat nearby. She didn't approach. She didn't need to. She had done enough by just being there. A presence, a calm, a mother. Later that evening, as the children had left and the books were back on their shelf, Evelyn sat beside Echo. "You were never just muscle," she whispered, stroking the dog's fur. "You were medicine." Echo let out a slow breath and tucked her nose beneath her paw. Her puppies curled against her side. She hadn't been trained for this. But some hearts didn't need training to heal others. They just needed the chance. The night of Christmas Eve blanketed Frost Hollow in silence. Snow drifted down like soft ashes, covering roofs, sidewalks, and pine trees in a hush of white. Warm lights glowed behind closed curtains, and the streets were nearly empty, save for the faint hum of the wind and the occasional flicker of a street lamp. Inside the small veterinary clinic on Maple Street, Echo lay curled on a thick woolen blanket in the corner, her pups nestled tightly against her. Sawyer Clark sat nearby on a folding chair, nursing a cup of lukewarm cocoa, chatting with Lila Monroe, who was finishing paperwork at the reception desk. Lila, in her early 50s, had sharp gray eyes softened by laugh lines and a deep compassion earned through decades of heartbreak and healing. She wore a maroon cardigan and snow boots, her silver-streaked hair tied in a bun. Though the clinic was closed, she'd offered Sawyer and Echo shelter for the night just in case the cold worsened. Suddenly, Echo lifted her head. Her ears perked, nostrils flaring. She rose slowly, stepping away from her pups with a quiet whine. Then she let out a low growl, not aggressive, but urgent. A sound Sawyer had learned to respect. "What is it, girl?" he asked, standing. Echo padded toward the door, pawed it once, then again, then barked sharply. Sawyer moved to the door, but before he could open it, Echo used her nose to nudge a woolen scarf off the hook and trotted back to the door, dragging it behind her like a message. Lila looked up. "She's trying to say something." Without hesitation, Sawyer unlocked the door, and the wind slapped them with a gust of icy air. Echo dashed out, turning immediately left toward the dimly lit sidewalk along the main road. Lila grabbed her coat, Sawyer took a flashlight, and they followed. Down the street, near the old bus shelter, Echo came to a stop. She barked again, short, sharp, and direct. Under the shelter, partially hidden behind a rusted trash bin, lay a frail figure slumped on the ground. "Dear God," Lila whispered. Sawyer rushed forward. The man was old, his skin ghost pale, beard thick with ice crystals, and his body curled inward in a fetal position. His clothes were threadbare, a thin jacket over a flannel shirt, torn jeans, no gloves. Next to him, a plastic grocery bag held stale bread and a broken thermos. "Sir?" Sawyer knelt. "Can you hear me?" No response. "He's breathing, but shallow." Lila said, checking his wrist. Hypothermia. If we don't move him now— Sawyer didn't wait. He wrapped his jacket around the man's upper body, lifted him gently, and carried him back toward the clinic. Echo stayed close to his heels, glancing up with every step as if to make sure they were doing it right. Back at the clinic, Lila turned up the heat and prepared a warm compress. Sawyer laid the man on the examination table and started rubbing his arms to stimulate circulation. Echo sat near the table, eyes locked on the man, alert but calm. After 15 tense minutes, the man groaned faintly. His eyes opened dull blue, clouded with age and fatigue. "You're safe," Sawyer said gently. "You're inside. You'll be okay." The man blinked slowly. The dog," Lila smiled. "Yes, she found you." He whispered, "Angel." They learned his name was Franklin Boyd, 71, once a construction worker, once a father, now with no home after a heart surgery wiped out his savings. He'd been riding buses to stay warm, but missed the last one before Christmas Eve. "I didn't think anyone would come," he said, his voice raspy. "But then I saw her. This beautiful dog." He reached out and stroked Echo's head. She didn't flinch, just leaned into the touch. That moment silent, simple moved Lila to tears. By morning, news of Echo's rescue spread quickly. Frost Hollow wasn't a big town. Word passed through the bakery, the post office, and the fire station like wind through pine trees. By noon, several neighbors had dropped off food, blankets, and clothes for Franklin. A woman from the town council left a card and said they'd arrange temporary housing. But more than anything, everyone came to see Echo. They left thank you notes tied in ribbon. Someone brought her a chew toy shaped like a reindeer. Children pressed their hands to the glass to glimpse the dog who had saved a life on Christmas Eve. Sawyer stepped outside with Echo as snow fell gently, tiny crystals catching in her fur. "She doesn't even know what she did," he said, half to himself. "She does," Lila said, joining him, "but she doesn't need praise. She just follows her heart." That evening, the townspeople gathered outside the clinic. There was no parade, no grand ceremony, just warm lights, gloved hands clapping, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Thank you, Echo, guardian of Christmas Eve." The new year crept in quietly, dusted in white. Frost Hollow lay beneath a hush of fresh snow, the kind that softened sound and slowed time. Up on Hillridge Lane, a small cottage sat under a slope of pine trees, its chimney trailing a thin ribbon of smoke into the pale morning sky. Inside that cottage, warmth glowed. Sawyer Clark stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching snowflakes settle on the white picket fence he'd painted just last week. It was a modest house, a two-bedroom fixer-upper with a wraparound porch and creaky floorboards, but it had space, a fenced yard, a fireplace, and now it had family. Echo lay curled by the hearth, her silver and tan coat gleaming in the firelight. Her frame had filled out in recent weeks, no longer gaunt, but strong again. On her neck hung a leather collar, dark brown, with a polished brass plate that read, "Echo, Hero, Mother, K9 retired with honor." Sawyer had engraved it himself. The pups, Scout, Maple, and Dusty, tumbled across the thick rug still full of morning mischief. They were 4 months old now, clumsy but bright-eyed, each bearing a spark of their mother's vigilance and quiet wisdom. Scout had a slight crook in one ear, always standing tall and alert. Maple, the smallest, stuck to Echo's side like a shadow. Dusty, the explorer, had already figured out how to open the back screen door with his nose. Sawyer set his coffee down and crossed to the fireplace. He sank into the armchair, boots off, wool socks warming on the stone ledge. Echo lifted her head, eyes tracking him, and after a pause patted over and gently laid her head on his foot. He smiled, reaching down to stroke behind her ears. "You're home now," he whispered, and somehow those 3 words carried the weight of all the broken years behind them. Just a month ago, he'd lived alone in a silent apartment above the hardware store. No laughter, no movement, only the echo of boots on floorboards and police radios in the dark. But since the night he'd followed a starving mother dog through the snow, his life had shifted like tectonic plates. Slowly, but permanently. Later that morning, Lila Monroe arrived, bringing a housewarming gift, a homemade quilt with paw prints stitched along the edges. She wore a knitted scarf of forest green and brought biscuits for the pups in a paper sack that crinkled with joy. She stepped in, snowflakes still in her hair, and gasped with mock drama, "Well, look at this little kingdom." Sawyer chuckled. "We're still training the royalty to use the backyard instead of the kitchen." Lila crouched, immediately surrounded by excited tails and happy whines. Echo stood a little behind them, watching. When Lila opened her arms, Echo approached slowly, tail wagging low. "She trusts now," Lila said softly. "She saved a man's life on Christmas Eve," Sawyer replied, "and saved mine every day since." They sat down by the fire, sipping hot cider and telling stories. Lila shared one about her son Michael, who had trained with a K-9 unit much like Echo before he passed. It wasn't the sad kind of story anymore. Time had softened the edges. In Echo, she'd found not just a memory, but a reason to smile again. By afternoon, Franklin Boyd came up the hill, bundled in a borrowed coat. He'd begun staying at the town's shelter and helped shovel snow for the church in exchange for hot meals. Sawyer had kept in touch. Franklin leaned on his cane as he stepped onto the porch. "You built this fence yourself?" he asked, eyeing the straight rails. "Mostly," Sawyer said. "Dusty tried to eat the hammer, so it took longer." Franklin laughed deep and hoarse, like someone remembering how. As evening fell, Sawyer lit the fireplace again, fed the pups, and let them collapse in a warm, snoring pile beneath the window. Outside, the snow had thickened. Flakes danced in the porch light like glitter. Shaken from the sky, Echo stood at the threshold, gazing out. Sawyer joined her. The cold bit at his cheeks, but he didn't care. The town was quiet. Somewhere below, bells rang faintly, a church service perhaps. Children sang carols. But here, on this hill, it was just a man, a dog, and the life they'd chosen to rebuild. He looked down at Echo. "That night, when I cut the rope around your neck," he murmured, "I thought I was saving you." She looked up, eyes catching the glow of the fire behind them. "But it turns out," he whispered, "you were saving me too." She leaned into him, her side pressed against his leg. Inside, the pups stirred, chasing dream rabbits across imaginary snowfields. The fire popped gently. And above them, on the snow-covered roof, light from the windows glowed soft and golden like a beacon to anyone lost in the dark. A home wasn't just walls and doors. Sometimes it was made of choices, of second chances, of forgiveness offered without words. And sometimes it was found in the eyes of a dog who never gave up. Sometimes the miracles we pray for don't come wrapped in grand gestures or loud thunder. Sometimes they arrive on four legs, with tired eyes and a heart that refuses to give up. Echo was more than a dog. She was proof that even what the world throws away can still carry light. In a cold world, kindness is a fire, and when we choose to open our door, when we choose to love the broken, we don't just save them, they save us too. Maybe you felt like Echo, forgotten, judged, or misunderstood. Or maybe, like Sawyer, you've been searching for something to remind you that life still holds purpose. This story is a reminder that grace often finds us when we least expect it, and that somewhere, God is always working, even through pause and snowfall. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Drop a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, and type Amen if you believe in second chances, in healing, and in the quiet miracles only God can give. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more true stories of faith, love, and redemption. May God bless you and every soul still waiting to be found.